In Battle Shonen, you'll typically be able to find at least one character that has an extremely simple set of powers relative to the rest of their universe. In Yu Yu Hakusho, it's Yusuke. In Naruto, it's Naruto. In Bleach, it's Ichigo. And in this video, I'll be comparing the simplistic main characters of Jujutsu Kaisen and HunterxHunter to see who is the superior fighter. Yuji Itadori, the vessel for the King of Curses, versus Gon Freecs, the talented young hunter. As I have with many other cross-verse topics in the past, I will be taking a look at both characters' strength, speed, durability, hacks, and overall combat ability in order to determine who would win and why. And in a matchup like this, you'll find that more than hacks and overwhelming intelligence, what matters in this battle in particular is skill, power, and speed. You see, unlike some other instances of cross-verse battles on the channel, hacks or complex abilities aren't really going to be the deciding factor. In fact, it won't even play a part in deciding which of these two have the advantage. Gon and Yuji's bags respectively are so shallow that it simply isn't possible. Gon's Jajan-Ken makes up about 99% of his moveset, and Yuji isn't much better, considering that Black Flashes and Divergent Fists are all he really has in his arsenal at this point. This means that this fight is going to come down to a battle of punches and kicks, and when it comes to punching and kicking, Yuji has shown himself to be rather adept. Yuji's style of fighting nets him a lot of feats in the close quarters department due to his lack of curse technique. For example, Yuji being able to damage Hanami in the Kyoto Goodwill arc is an impressive feat of strength on its own. As in Chapter 6, we learn that the baseline amount of force that would be required to take down a special grade is comparable to that of a cluster bomb strike. This statement from Ijichi likely is in reference to special grades more akin to finger bearers in power, so when looking at unregistered curses like the Disaster Curse spirits, the amount of strength required to damage and exercise them gets even crazier. Not only is Hanami a disaster curse in their own right, but they also have been noted several times in the series to be a particularly durable one. So much so that they can survive a myriad of strikes that would be able to kill Jogo, another special grade that stands among the upper echelons of the verse. Long story short, Yuji by the end of Goodwill is casually punching with enough force to rival massive clusters of bomb strikes. This is also pretty consistent with the general showing of power by this time in the series, as Mecha Maru is able to shoot off a blast of cursed energy that is calced to have city block levels of output while not even being close to the level of strength that Yuji and Todo possess. We can say that Mecha Maru doesn't scale to them pretty certainly because he gets trounced by Gorilla Mode Panda, a character who is directly stated to be inferior to Todo in striking ability, Todo being a sorcerer who admits inferiority to Yuji in regards to pure physical might. It gets even crazier when you consider that this was Todo talking about Yuji before getting a massive boost to his overall manipulation of cursed energy and power, post Black Flash. On the low end, Yuji's casually tossing out city block levels of power with each punch, but if you reference Ijichi's statement and his performance against Hanami, then you're able to get his attack potency in this arc alone to large town level. Now, when strictly talking about calculable strength feats, Yuji's scaling ends here. However, there are quite a few things that exist within the narrative to imply that he can hit much harder than we've already discussed. As I already explained, from relatively early on in the series, Yuji is able to tussle with and actually damage unregistered special grades with his basic attacks. Being able to damage Hanami essentially means he's able to damage all of the other disaster curses. This includes Jogo, a character who is strong enough to create a mountain-sized domain expansion based purely on his own capacity for cursed energy. I know many people think that Jujutsu Kaisen domains aren't as large as they seem on the inside because the external barrier is small, but several moments and statements in the series make it clear that domain expansions simply create pocket dimensions that don't have consistent measurements on the inside and out. To put it simply, a domain's external barrier could be just big enough to fit a few people within it, but the inside conditions of it truly are what they seem. In Jogo's case, it creates an actual mountain, one he is able to conjure up completely using his own reserves of energy. Considering the fact that Yuji can damage characters significantly more durable than him with ease, it's safe to say that Yuji can damage Jogo as well in a straight up confrontation. Curses are purely constructed of their cursed energy, so this capacity to create a mountain with his ability should make him mountain level as well as anybody who scales to him. This level of AP for Yuji can possibly be argued all the way up to island level using this line of thinking, as his scaling to Jogo necessitates that he scales above another character in the series who was able to create an entire island inside of their domain. Now, I know this type of scaling in particular may not be concrete enough for some people, however, the internal logic is solid enough for me to bring it up as a possibility for Yuji within this fight. He gets significantly stronger following the Shibuya incident arc, however, his feats aren't contextual enough to say just how much stronger he has become through his hardships. One could certainly say that he has surpassed the level of ability he had before, but until we get concrete statements, feats, or new calculations to work with, it's hard to pin down what Yuji's new level of strength actually looks like in a very quantifiable sense. This means that for the sake of this video, Yuji is large town level on the conservative end, and anywhere from mountain to island level when using the domain scaling. As I always do in versus discussions like these, I will explain how the fight changes depending on your interpretation, and this fact makes itself super relevant when discussing speed in Jujutsu Kaisen. Because when it comes to Jujutsu Kaisen speed scaling, there is one particular statement that applies to the fastest characters of the verse that kinda downplays everyone else if it's true. In the manga, we have a curse spirit that is comparable to one of the fastest characters in the verse, and after blitzing a partially awakened Maki and flexing his new abilities, he is stated to reach Mach 3, and this ability to reach 3 times the speed of sound is something that is hyped up to be nearly impossible to match. If you take this statement at face value and don't think that anything contradicts it in the entirety of the series, then Yuji's speed at best would cap out at Mach 3. However, I, along with many other people in the power scaling community, find this statement to be a bit wonky when looking at the context of other feats and statements demonstrated by slower characters. Now, unfortunately, I'll need to dive into serious manga spoilers for a bit to talk about speed, so skip to this time code if you're an anime only. Now, when talking about characters who contradict the Mach 3 statement, Yuji is actually one of them who shows off a feat that should be faster than what the Naoya statement implies. In his fight against Choso, he is able to dodge piercing blood with moderate success. This attack is stated to exceed the speed of sound. Yuji demonstrates the ability to react to this level of speed several times in his fight with Choso, even though it is implied to be a very tall task for him. Now, this on its own isn't that important because all it means is that Yuji is somewhere around the speed of sound in terms of reaction speed, but what is the fact that Yuji is able to react to piercing blood with such a small amount of distance between the two, as you can see in this panel. When the numbers are crunched, this feat is calculated to require speeds beyond Mach 3 even when being more conservative with the numbers. And while it's true that Yuji specifically baited out piercing blood in this instance to get a better reaction, the same thing could be said for Maki in her rematch versus Naoya. The problem is that even when trying to time this Mach 3 attack properly, she got blitzed, while Yuji is showing off Mach 4 to 5 reaction speeds while being significantly weaker at this point. No, I'm not here to tell you that you have to disagree with the author on this particular subject. I understand just how insane that is to hear, so just like I did with the strength portion of Yuji scaling, I will acknowledge multiple interpretations and possibilities. On the low end, Yuji is a bit below Mach 3 in terms of speed. A more middling scale for him places him at Mach 5. And if you completely throw the Naoya statement out of the window and think that this is inherently contradictory to the scaling, you can use Maki's feat of catching a bullet back in Goodwill, in which case he can scale all the way up to Mach 20. Now, this is where we get a little crazy, but in the event you think that Yuji now scales closely to a fully awakened Maki based on his showings in his fight against Sukuna, you might even be able to make a case for massively hypersonic speeds that reach over Mach 500 based purely on Hikaru's ability to dodge lightning, and Maki scaling above Naoya and Naobito, the latter being the second fastest sorcerer alive. I'm aware that this is a pretty massive range of speeds to list as possible for Yuji, however, it's important to lay out the potential lines of scaling that could apply to his character. I'll narrow down the list of potential speeds when I get to comparing Yuji and Gon, but for now, I'll give you guys a thought process behind the scaling so you can decide which version of it makes the most sense to you. Before moving on to Gon though, I do need to quickly talk about the few relevant abilities that Yuji possesses outside of his statistical showings. In very Yuji fashion though, as of the recording of this video, all of his hacks have to do with some form of punching and kicking anyway. Divergent Fist essentially allows Yuji to lag his attack and create a double impact. Early on in the series, he wasn't actually able to control this cursed energy trait, however now that isn't the case, and he's been able to use it in situations to give him an edge in close quarters combat. The second main ability or form of hacks that can help Yuji is Black Flash. This technique can't be used at will, even now unfortunately, however Yuji has quite a knack for tapping into this power when necessary. His strength is raised to the power of 2.5 and he's given a temporary boost to his abilities that essentially make him function at 120% of his normal capacity. Simply speaking, with Black Flash, Yuji can one-shot opponents that he otherwise wouldn't be able to. I could bring up his Soul Perception and damaging ability as viable hacks for this fight, However, based on its portrayal in the series so far, Yuji can't quite do that intentionally against opponents that aren't Mahito, so that isn't the most pressing ability in this context. Outside of special abilities related to Jujutsu though, Yuji has shown an extreme level of proficiency with close quarters combat and martial arts, and the skill shows itself basically in every encounter that Yuji finds himself in. Now, with all of Yuji's basic scaling being said and done, it's time to look at Gon to see how he compares. Just like with Yuji, Gon gets to show off how powerful he is in a physical sense quite often because, to put it bluntly, physical abilities are all that he's got. Gon is a pretty interesting case though when it comes to actually analyzing and breaking down his power, because he doesn't compare to a lot of characters that have notable feats in his normal state. Just like a large portion of Jujutsu Kaisen, much of the HunterxHunter verse is really weak in the conventional sense. They don't have very blatantly impressive feats of strength or destruction until you get to the top tiers, and Gon doesn't really scale to those top tiers under normal circumstances. We'll get into where he scales when taking his adult form into account later, but many of the litmus tests of strength in the series, like the Phantom Troop and high-level Chimera Ants, just mop the floor with Gon, even when strictly talking about a physical fight. You have enhancers like Uvogin who can casually tank super bazookas to the face with no damage, or punch with enough force to crease tanks, but even in the Chimera Ant arc, it's hard to say that Gon truly compares to him in a straight contest of strength. It's certainly possible with how much stronger he gets after Kite's death, but because of Gon's isolation from fighting overwhelmingly strong opponents at this time, it's somewhat hard to put a finger on where exactly he should scale. The last time we get a direct comparison between him and Uvogin, we see that they aren't even in the same dimension, as Nobunaga is able to show off superior strength feats to Gon, with Uvogin being orders of magnitude stronger than Nobunaga when talking about pure physical might. Based on Gon's ability to handle fodder Chimera Ants though, we can say that he should scale to the likes of bottom tier Phantom Troop members like Bonolenov and his crushing of the Chimera. By crunching the numbers, we find that this is a city block level feat and something that Gon should be able to pull off quite casually at this time in the series, especially when taking into account a full power Jajanken. Gon is also able to send an Owl Chimera flying across a country with the use of Jajanken, but the force required to do that actually falls below that of the amount to recreate Bonolenov's destruction. When following this line of scaling for Gon, we can say that he's pretty safely within the city block level in terms of attack potency, with the capacity to increase his strength multiple times over by using Rock. It has been said in the series that his striking power with Rock is 10 times that of his normal ability, and if this is to be taken literally and not as any form of hyperbole, it would mean that Gon is able to crack into those multi-city block levels of power. As I said earlier in this video, I'll address what Gon's scaling looks like in his adult form when I start to talk about his hacks, but before I do that, I'd like to comb over the multiple interpretations for his speed, because just like with Jujutsu Kaisen, HunterxHunter speed could be really lowballed if you simply take a look at what the author implies with certain statements. Netero, for example, is hyped up to be an extremely impressive case of dedication and pure speed, and all he does after years of prayer and practicing his basic punching is vaguely surpass the speed of sound. Now, this Netero doesn't necessarily have a direct line of scaling to Gon, but the way this scene is portrayed and with how we know that this form of Netero was already an experienced Nen user, it wouldn't be wild to say that at this point in the story he was a significantly superior fighter to Gon, and if that's the case, he might not even be cracking supersonic tiers of speed. Once again, I know many people don't think an author can be wrong within the context of their own series or can have contradictory statements in their own manga, so I will present this as a potential option for Gon's speed. However, just like I did with Yuji, I want to present a more favorable and somewhat consistent argument for what Gon's level of speed should look like. If you're looking for contradictions to the Netero barely speed of sound argument, you can just look at mid-level Chimera Ants like Chitu, who are able to dodge bullets very casually. Now, Gon doesn't necessarily scale to these characters while in his base form, but the calculations for this speed feat place Chitu at Mach 18, which supports the idea that HunterxHunter characters don't cap out at the speed of sound. Chimera Ant Art Killua is also confident in his ability to take down fighter jets and tanks, and if you interpret this as him saying that he can straight up body them in a conflict and not avoid them rather, then Killua and by proxy Gon should scale to elite level fighter jets, which in some cases can max out at around Mach 3.2. Once again, higher levels of speed scaling exists in HunterxHunter, but Gon only gets access to this level of scaling once he reaches his adult form. And speaking of which, I think I'll address exactly how much Gon increases his abilities in the event that he puts it all on the line against Yuji. By forming an end contract and throwing everything away for power, Gon is able to transform into his adult self and gain all of the nen and physical ability that comes from that level of training. This is essentially Gon's potential completely being unleashed for a short period of time, and when he is in this state, the previous problem of not scaling to certain characters is a thing of the past. When witnessing this transformation, P2 says that Gon is powerful enough to be a potential threat to Meruem, a character who stands at the pinnacle of strength in the HunterxHunter universe. Now, I'm not going to get into the Gon versus Meruem debate within this video, and I'm just going to assume that Pito means this in the simplest way possible. Gon scales to Meruem full stop. In the event that this is the case, his speed scaling gets an astounding boost, going from the Mach 3 speeds I mentioned earlier all the way up to over 200 times the speed of sound. This level of speed comes from Netero and his momentary conflict with P2 and his extended battle against Meruem, two characters that Gon in this form is at least relative to. His attack potency also sees a very significant increase, jumping from city block to large town level just as his speed did. This is because Yuppie is able to create a rage blast that exerted well over 400 kilotons of force, and this nets the large town level figure that I just spoke of. Gon obviously scales above the likes of this Yuppie if he's able to even be comparable to Meruem. Now, if you're familiar with HunterxHunter scaling, you might be wondering why I didn't compare adult Gon to post-Rose Meruem's mountain destruction feat, and it is simply because P2's statement doesn't apply to that version of the Chimera Ant King. At this point in the story, he really has no way of knowing how strong Meruem is after surviving the explosion, and as such, you can't really scale Gon to that level of power in good faith. We also have direct statements from Yuppie and Poof that Meruem is considerably stronger after his recovery. If you wanted to ignore all of this though and give Gon the benefit of the doubt, and really stretch P2's statement for all that it's worth, you could scale Gon to city level off of that blast. I know many people think that this wouldn't a mountain level scale because he's obviously shooting at a mountain, but as you can see in the manga, there is still quite a bit left of the actual land structure that he attacked, meaning that this blast couldn't quite scale that high. Regardless, this is a massive jump from his previous level of power. The main issue with this form though is that it is on a time limit, and Gon in character only uses this move after being pushed into despair for an entire arc. I'll talk about the character part of this discussion in more depth in just a second, but now it's time to see how these two stack up against one another. I mentioned this at the very beginning of the video, but Yuji versus Gon is a fight that comes down to skill and physical ability at the end of the day. Hacks will not be the deciding factor here. Now, there are a couple of things I didn't mention when scaling both of these characters that are somewhat relevant to the outcome of the fight, with one of the major things being their durability. I have a habit of just assuming that you know that their strength and durability have to scale to one another or they just tear their bodies apart, but for all those who don't know that or at least didn't consider that before me saying it, well, I just told you. Whatever their AP scales to, their durability scales to as well. If it couldn't or it didn't, we would have really blatant showings of that, and they would tear themselves apart when exerting their full power. The second thing that isn't super important to the battle, but I know will be mentioned if I don't make note of it, is verse equalization or lack thereof. I know many people are on the fence about whether or not you should do that with versus battles like this, but in this instance, in a battle like this, Nen versus Cursed Energy, physical prowess versus physical prowess, it honestly doesn't really matter if you make the power systems equal. Gon can hurt Yuji if he's strong enough, and the opposite is true. They don't even need to really see the other person's use of energy because of how lacking they are in creative uses of it. But if you want, you can assume they are operating under a similar set of rules. It doesn't really change too much or have that much of an impact on the outcome, especially since Nen and Cursed Energy function in very similar ways when talking about Yuji and Gon's usage of it. When talking about that though, we gotta look at how they compare. Starting off with the lowballed versions of both characters, and based off the listed feats and statements, it's clear that Yuji is the dominant fighter. Even on the super lowballed end of the spectrum, he scales to city block level just like Gon, and in terms of speed, just edges him out a bit, being more closely tied to faster than sound speeds than a super conservative base Gon estimate would be. Technically, Gon should be able to severely cripple Yuji if he hit him with rock, but not only is Gon already slower than Yuji under normal circumstances, but the charge required for that move would never be allowed with someone like Yuji pressing him, as we see with Knuckle. Gon wouldn't be able to create the distance to charge up his Nen to such ridiculous degrees, and that basically means that Yuji would just wear him down with similar strength and overwhelming speed to finish the fight. Now, Gon could technically use his Hatsu to fake out Yuji and barrage him with normal attacks as he did versus Knuckle, but this strategy wouldn't work on Yuji more than one time, and the hit to his aura would only just tilt the stats more and more in Yuji's favor. In this version of the battle, it actually does result in a pretty high diff conclusion considering the difference between them is so small, but Yuji would come out on top regardless. Now, when looking at both the mid-ball and high-ball scales, the gaps between Gon and Yuji just don't scale linearly. Gon's maximum AP and speed respectively get blown out by Yuji to the point that he might just get blitzed and pieced up until the fight is over. Multiple island-level strikes bombarding him at speeds he couldn't react to would just be the end for Gon in this scenario. However, with his adult form, things start to change a little bit. Now, I'll talk about how the fight would go in a second, but before I do, I would like to make it clear that Gon is extremely unlikely to do this in a fight against Yuji, especially when he harbors no particular hatred for him. Gon only resorts to that Nen contract once he feels that he's lost all hope and will die without getting Kite back. That transformation is the culmination of an entire arc's worth of anger, despair, and hatred, and I don't think that could all be replicated by Yuji in one fight if they are remaining in character. Gon has been in life and death situations before, yet he's never made that contract outside of the context of P2. If you remove the narrative limitation, however, and just have him fight Yuji in his adult form, you do certainly get a better, closer fight than before. When using adult Gon and placing him up against a super low-balled Yuji, Gon absolutely steamrolls him without much difficulty. He essentially just blitzes him and bodies him in the same way that he did P2. However, it's once you start being a bit more generous to Itadori when things start swaying back in his favor. You see, Gon in this form is throwing out small town level attacks and moving hundreds of times faster than sound. The strength isn't really a problem for Yuji though. He has at least mountain level strength and durability that basically means he can weather the storm of Gon's punches for an extremely long time. The problem for Yuji is speed, because unless you think that Yuji at the point he is in the manga can pull something off similar to Hikari's lightning avoidance feat, he has no way to compare to Gon in any capacity. Normally, I'd say this becomes a war of attrition with Gon having the advantage as the one not getting hit, but due to the nature of his Nen contract, his power won't last forever, and as soon as it runs out, Yuji won't even have to do anything to win the fight. But just for fun, for the sake of a hypothetical, let's take this one step further. Having Gon lose simply because of a time limit is lame. So let's really give him the benefit of the doubt here. Say he scales to Rose Merriam's attack potency and removes the time limit on his transformation. If we are this generous to Gon and we aren't this generous to Yuji, Gon steamrolls because he's just blitzing him and hitting him with attacks that over time would start to do damage. However, if we are as generous to Yuji as we are to Gon in this situation, then Yuji is coming out here and putting Gon 6 feet under. At their very best, Yuji is faster, stronger, and more durable, all to the point that you wouldn't even really be able to call it a contest. Even if you give Gon the benefit of the doubt and say somehow he has mountain level attack potency and is moving hundreds of times faster than sound, Yuji has island level attack potency plus Mach 500 speeds that would overwhelm Gon in an instant. He'd be able to tank all of his attacks, deal out blows that Gon wouldn't be able to survive, and move so fast that Gon wouldn't be able to avoid him. It's interesting that these characters actually come off very relative when lowballed, but the ceiling for Yuji's strength and Gon's are as different as night and day. And that is Gon versus Yuji. I covered this fight in as much depth as I possibly could, trying to account for every possibility and argument imaginable. So if you enjoyed this video and enjoy this style of content in general, subscribe, hit the bell, and check out this playlist full of versus battle content for you to binge. If there are any cross-verse matchups that you'd like to see from me in the future, let me know down in the comments. In any case, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in the next one.